How is everyone doing? We're back with Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. Myself, Jeff Black. We got Brandon DeCruz on the other side. He's looking beautiful wearing an Iron House shirt. But today is
Showing
it's
support as
our
always.
exactly. It's a mid-century spot. I'm getting you to move to Nashville one day. It's happening.
Let's get it.
Episode, yeah, you can leave that. No one likes to live in the Northeast. Come on, anyone in the Northeast doesn't like to live in the Northeast either, man. I actually have family from the Northeast. I can get away saying
You know
that.
what? I
So
gotta say though, I'm thankful. I always say that I'm always trying to express gratitude in every aspect of my life. It keeps me anchored. And today I woke up extremely grateful, and this is the reason why. It is over 40 degrees today, and that is a blessing. And I know to you, 40 degrees is like you're like spitting at that, like it's disgusting.
that's
But
fucking really
last
cold.
week when I was sitting here, you're recording this podcast, I was literally in a tundra. It was just snowing everywhere. My car's sliding around. So it's the little things in life that go far. But I will say that Tennessee looks better and better by the week, the month, the year.
Dude, I mean, just come on down. I mean, it'd be a life. You'd have all fun down here. You could be around a bunch of like-minded people. And that's a big thing I've decided as I've hit 42, going in 43. One of my goals this year was I only associate with those who could roll themselves. And there have been some people I have decided to not talk to this year that I'm just like, there's too many discrepancies. You don't see them, but I do. And I'm one of those people, like, when I see them, I just know that
No.
I can't go forward with it. But
It's funny that you say that. I made a post this past week. I actually had the pleasure of running into a close friend of mine that actually was like one of my first bodybuilding influences. His name's John Name. He's a military veteran. We worked together back in the day. We used to run a chain of supplement stores together when he had retired from the military. But he was like the first individual. I was in college at the time, and he was dragging me along to bodybuilding shows. We used to go to expos, go to the Europa shows, and he's an individual. He was one of the first like really close friends of mine that competed. And now, mind you, we are decades apart. So John just turned 51. And so he's been in this game, a load of time. He's been training 35 years. And it was so good to see him. And I'm the type with my friends that, I'm so busy with so many things, and this is not to make an excuse, but I try to stay locked in on the things that I'm really trying to contribute and work towards. And I know you're very much the same. And it's not that we're able to see or speak with our friends at all times. However, when we do, we really do make the time to be attentive to them, to really catch up with them, engage with them, and have articulate, engaging, really in-depth conversations, really hear about what they're doing, how they're doing. And so I was able to catch up with him this past weekend, actually. And, I made a post about, the importance of surrounding yourself with like-minded individuals who support your goals, that have either common interests or a common desire and passion for things. And I don't care what you do. It doesn't need to be fitness related, but I've really found in my experience, both in terms of my own friendships, my relationships, as well as in my own client relationships, like the clients that I get along best with have a very similar mindset. And I'm not talking about in terms of their approach to fitness, I'm talking about in terms of their approach to life. Like some of my top, clients that I have the best relationship with, they're not competitors. They're not former models. They're not bodybuilders. What they are is successful businessmen or businesswomen that are really passionate about what they do on a daily basis. They understand the importance and the payoff of having a long-term investment mindset where they're always thinking into the future rather than giving into what feels great in the moment, because a lot of people sacrifice their long-term goals for temporary or momentary pleasure, and that's just something I can't relate to.
you know, I've gotten better at it. I've gotten better at being able to disconnect that side of me to quote unquote blend in with others. But I'd be lying if I say that my attention span to that shit's not very long. So, I mean,
I
I've
can't do it
learned it.
anymore, my man.
Yeah.
I can't do the surface level conversations, and I don't have a desire to. And I think that a lot of times there's like societal expectations that we're just obligated to engage with certain people. And really, like we were speaking about in last week's podcast, we were talking about Dunbar's number and like our tribe. And I'm really looking for, what I have, who I have in my tribe. It's all about quality over quantity. And I would rather have a smaller tribe of people that I really connect with, that I support. I'm happy for them. I'm genuinely, like, there isn't a competition between us. Like, we're pushing each other to get better, like you and I do. It's never like, hey, let's see which one of us can get more clients. It's like, when you're getting clients, I'm getting clients. We're both happier. We're both accomplishing stuff. And that's why this has been such a great friendship as well as a partnership. And we're able to work as a team. Whereas there's a lot of people in this industry, they see everything as a competition. And they think that, like, my whole mindset is like, there's enough room for all of us to eat. There's more than enough clients that need help. And here's the thing, we could all work together to really advance the standard of this industry and advance the coaching practice. But people want to just be throwing shots at each other, and that's just something I'm not interested in.
Yeah, I don't partake in it if you noticed, like, because I'm the person when I come in, I usually just grab a fucker by the throat, slam him to the ground like I've done a few times social media.
You're going like on a bazooka.
So people don't fuck with me, because but here's the difference. I don't get on there and piss poor and cry about who blocks me and why I block people and all that fucking bitch ass shit like some people do. I'm like, God, the reason your coaching business sucks is because you spend half the fucking time jerking your dick on social media when you should just fucking shut the fuck up. But the problem is they don't ask a real man who's older than them for advice about what's fruitful in their time and endeavors versus what's not. And I can say I never even did that shit anyway. I want those people like, I just shut the fuck up and go do work. So I'm like,
I'd rather be about it and act on things. As you very well know in my own life, personally with me, I'm never going to tell you I'm doing something. I've already done it and I'll tell you after the fact. And that's how I make decisions in life. And although I really do value, and I think this is something that, I think this is a great component of coaching, but also a necessary component of being a great client. And this is something that it's a characteristic and a component that applies to all aspects of life, but we need to be able to give objective constructive criticism as well as accept it. And there's a lot of people, whether it be in life or in this industry, that they can dish it out, but they can't take it. They can't really receive it. And here's the thing, like, with our conversations, I'm never going to waste your time, in terms of if I ask you a question and something, it's because I have an interest in your answer. I'm going to listen to you wholeheartedly, take it on. Even there's many times that you've told me things I don't want to hear. And here's the thing, a lot of times I've implemented it. There was a time that, Jeff,
did you implement keto yet? I'm just kidding.
I haven't went all that way. Although I had utilized keto with a lot of people over the years, just in a very different fashion than you. But what I will say is, there was a moment that, years ago where you were like, you need to do more lifestyle clients. You need to stop at this, all the competitors, and you need to focus. You have a large skill set and you need to develop it and also apply it to more people. And at that time, I was so locked in on competition prep clients, because that was what, at that time in my life and at that time in my career, especially with where I was at, because I had a corporate career and I had such limited time to devote to coaching, I was really at that time really looking for clients that were more along the same mindset as me. And really the best decision I made was going against that, embracing the discomfort and working with people that were completely from a different lifestyle, completely different background that initially I couldn't relate to, and learning to relate to them, getting to know them, seeing their experience, working with them, gaining experience through the fundamental principles that I applied to them, the feedback that I got from them, the relationships that I built with them. And now it's to the point where, like, I've had so much fulfillment from that sector of my clientele. I still love competitors, don't get me wrong, but I don't see it as like, it used to be really exciting to me to have competitors because we were taking them to stage, and it was something that I was almost able to live through them, having been that I stepped away from the stage or stepped away from competing to help others. And I had gotten to a fork in the road where I decided, listen, it's either I continue focusing on my own competitive endeavors and goals, or I focus on clients. And I took the latter decision. And the great thing about this is, I still get fulfillment from bringing clients to stage, but I get fulfillment from seeing a client, be able to go on vacation and feel confident about themselves. I feel great, improving someone's lab markers and just, empowering them through education. So it's been such a, fulfilling opportunity as well as process. And that was because I opened up, I took on your advice, and you said, listen, just try it and see how it works. And I was, I took on your constructive criticism, and you were like, listen, your business is not going to keep growing if you just do competitors. And you have the opportunity, you have people coming to you and you're turning them down, or you're sending them to other people, and you need to take them up. And you challenged me to that. And I embraced the challenge. And I will tell you, 10 out of 10 times, it was a great decision, and I'm thankful for it. And I think that's something that we have to be willing, regardless of what stage of our career we're in, because a lot of times, when we're early on, we're a little bit more likely to take on advice. But I feel like a lot of people, both in terms of their ability to take on constructive criticism, as well as their ability to keep pushing themselves to learn more, they get to this certain level in their career. And this could apply to any career, but especially within the coaching industry, which I could speak best to because that's what I've been in for so long, as have you. But a lot of people, they get stagnant or they get complacent, and then they're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
But they think that what they've accomplished or what they've learned previously is good enough. And here's the thing, this industry keeps evolving, and it's never going to stop, and it keeps expanding more and more and more. And it's a competitive industry. It's highly saturated. But the thing is that if you continue, like, we have a leg up on people because we've been doing this so long, but also we've never stopped that evolutionary process of learning more to serve more.
Well, it's one of those deals when you talk to people, like, I just give people honest feedback for how I see things. You know what I mean? And that's what the whole purpose of asking people, questions are, and getting to understand people, is you think about those situations from a different view and a different lens. And I saw all the potential you had for Gen Pop people because you break high level things down to a low level, where people can comprehend and digest and break it down. Otherwise, we won't have an efficient podcast that's growing. So, I mean, truth's in the pudding, right? So, but we need to get into this because we always have so many good conversations. But today is episode 50. It's the mid-century one for us. We're going to talk about something known as REDS, relative energy deficiency syndrome, and low energy availability. The effects of chronic dieting and underfueling. We'll get into our last 7 days real quick, just quick touch points. Let's see. One, I got a levels blood glucose monitoring kit, and according to it, I have type 2 diabetes. But according to all my fingers and my toes, my blood sugars is in my 60s, 70s, and 80s. So hear me out. Like I emailed them and was like, hey, I feel like this might not. And they're like, oh, it could take up to 5 days to adjust out. And I said, but I've only got 30 days worth. And if I have to change out sensors, right, I'm like, this means I could lose up to half the month in proper tracking of data. And they were like, well, they gave me some answer back. And I was just like, okay, so what you're trying to tell me is this thing isn't as foolproof as you guys make it out to be. And I shouldn't really judge my insulin off this, or I could fall over dead by playing it wrong. But I'll be interested to see to report back on that. But my other news was I spent last week in Tampa, and I'll be a part of the new season for Boom America. I'm down there doing
Congrats, my man.
Yeah, with Kevin Harrington, his show from Shark Tank. It was a super cool opportunity to be a part of that, and I was pretty stoked for it. So yeah, that's kind of where I've been kind of digesting it all, because I'm a private person, but I passed this book on now to a few people who really gave me the first couple I sent out like 3 chapters, and people are just like, 2 of the people who are part of like the quote unquote A team were like, dude, this is like really good. And I was like, oh. So part of me is like happy, but then the other part of me is like, kind of like sweating being in the limelight and, kind of all that stuff. So I'm like, oh,
dude, embrace it, because you have prepared your entire life for this. And maybe it has been in a different sector of your life, but the skills, the experiences, and everything that you've come to, all the challenges and obstacles you've overcome, or have prepared more than prepared you for this, this time in the spotlight that you will get, very, very shortly upcoming.
It's kind of like, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to celebrate it, but I don't like celebrating things. So it's like me dealing with my own shit. And like, I know what it can do for me. I know what it can do for a lot of people involved with me. And I don't take that for granted at all, because that's why I like doing what I do. Because, I had this very blunt conversation with a friend of mine. I was like, if it wasn't for the fact that I enjoy doing what I do daily, like working with others and helping others grow and find potential in business and like health and fitness, I don't know if I would have probably just enjoyed living any longer, just simply on the basis of, it's not very fruitful to me. Like life, helping others and leading and doing the stuff I do is very fruitful to me. And I just don't think I think it's worth doing things that make you happy. And I tell everybody, when everyone I've ever met who's old, when they're old, dude, they all got fucking regrets. So I've tried to live my life with as minimal regrets as possible. And I think if more people did that, they'd probably have like a better life. 100%. Anyway, so with that being said, how's your last 7 days been?
Dude, I'm going to make this real quick. It's been a great last week, a very productive. It was my mother's birthday yesterday, so I celebrated with her. Like I mentioned on last week's podcast, I'm sending her to an all-inclusive vacation to Puerto Rico, so I cannot wait to do that, because there's not one person in my life that deserves that more than her. But other than that, man, we have a very truncated podcast today. We have a very complex topic as well, so let's get into this.
All right, man. Well, let's get into it. So what the hell is REDS? We all know it is, well, maybe not all, but some, relative energy deficiency syndrome. What is REDS and what is low energy availability?
Absolutely. So this week, we're going to dive into REDS, which is a topic that isn't discussed nearly enough in the nutrition, bodybuilding, and fitness spaces, and is something I haven't heard anyone, honestly, in our circle of, friends, coaches, fitness professionals, and podcasters cover. So in our usual fashion, we're going to open up the conversation on this topic, and we're going to take a deep dive on it. And actually, this is going to parlay into 2 parts, because It's a really complex topic first and foremost. I want to be able to create clarity on it, but it's something it's very in depth, as well as we don't have the time to get into it. This would be a 2-hour podcast if we were to do it justice, and I really do want to do that. So we're going to break it up. But REDS, which is also referred to as relative energy deficiency in sport, or relative energy deficiency syndrome, is a multifactorial condition stemming from low energy availability that results in impaired physiological functioning, which includes impairments to metabolic rate, menstrual function, bone health, immunity, protein synthesis, cardiovascular health, and many other areas of physiological functioning. So REDS was originally termed and identified in 2014 by the International Olympic Committee, but this is a syndrome which actually has been seen in sports science and exercise physiology literature since the 80s and 90s. But it was actually originally termed the female athlete triad and only thought to affect females. And so when we look at the female athlete triad, this referred to a condition which included 3 commonalities, which were low energy availability, which was often accompanied by disordered eating habits, menstrual cycle dysfunction, aka amenorrhea, and then low bone mineral density and osteoporosis. And so in 2014, the female athlete triad was officially updated and transitioned to REDS after many coaches, researchers, and practitioners started to realize that although it presents more commonly in females, it actually does affect males, and it does affect a lot of males in sports. And so and beyond that, its impacts go far beyond the 3 areas outlined by the female athlete triad. So REDS is comprised of 10 components that are attributed to an extended or chronic period of being in low energy availability, resulting in this energy deficiency. And so these 10 components include impairments to the immune system, menstrual cycle function, bone health, your endocrine system and endocrine function, metabolic function, hematology, growth and development, psychological function, cardiovascular health, and gastrointestinal systems. So REDS is most commonly seen in sports that either have a high workload component to them, or sports which emphasize a degree of either weight control, weight classes, or leanness. And so this is why we see a greater prevalence of REDS in endurance sports like distance running, cycling, and triathlons. We see it in weight restricted or weight class sports like wrestling, boxing, and mixed martial arts. And then also in aesthetic sports like gymnastics, ballet, dance, skating, and even our favorite, bodybuilding. And so there are several reasons why I wanted to cover REDS in this week's podcast. And I'm going to open up about my own experience, because this is something that I suffered through, in my early teens. And unfortunately, there wasn't the education around it that there is now. There actually wasn't even a term for it. So, I'll go a little bit into my own background with this, because if I knew now, or I knew then what I know now, I really would have been able to kind of change the trajectory. And even in my case, I was really lucky because I did surround myself with very educated individuals that really did help me. But first of all, we're going to cover this for many reasons. First of all, this is a topic that's rarely covered by any of the coaches in our space, which I understand, as like I mentioned previously, it's a really complex topic, which is difficult to tease out and provide clarity on. But just because something is difficult to learn about and discuss doesn't mean we shouldn't put in the work to do so. And it's also something I'm encountering more and more in clients who come to me with a history of chronic dieting, especially females, who have had a background in physique sports where they've spent years trying to eat less and exercise more in order to get on stage season after season after season. And as a result, they've incurred a ton of side effects, some of which they're still dealing with. So what I generally will notice with a lot of these former female competitors is they still don't have regular menstrual cycle function. And this is one of the big telltale signs of relative energy deficiency. And as I mentioned previously, this is also something I personally dealt with and went through in my teenage years. So in my own personal experience, or in my personal history, in my early teens, I initially gravitated towards endurance sports like cross country and track, which I would do in school. And then I also, outside of school and outside of my formal high school sports, I also did martial arts. And both endurance sports and martial arts have a weight restriction aspect to them, as they require you to be light and agile. And also at that time, I had a lot of coaches and a lot of instructors that would constantly reinforce the fact that being lighter would either help me run better, perform, or place better, or compete in a lighter weight class. And I think a lot of us can understand that if you did wrestling or, a lot of these weight restricted sports, it was always like lighter's better. And so this caused me to become really conscious of my weight, even at an early age, which eventually led me to develop a lot of disordered eating habits. So even when I was a kid, like we're talking 11 years old, I was checking food labels. I was calculating calories in a food journal, like literally writing it
Yeah.
down, because honestly, at that time, we didn't have apps like MyFitnessPal, if you remember, Jeff. So like
No,
I was
no, you
doing
got
it
to
in a
write it
journal.
down.
Yeah, absolutely. You had to go to the store, write everything down, calculate it, have a
Yeah.
calculator out. There was no cell phones with calculators. And so I did it the hard way. It did teach me a lot about nutrition, but the issue with that was I was constantly aiming to eat less to reduce my body weight at a way younger age than I needed to. And so, for example, I was already watching my calorie intake by the time I was 11, despite the fact that I was literally training for 20 plus hours a week. So if anything, I should have been eating everything in sight, especially at that age. And so really what's confounded by this is initially I lost weight from doing that. And I actually
Hmm.
saw an increase in my performance in sports as I had improved my power to weight ratio. And I was getting a lot of positive feedback, both in terms of like my race times, and at my martial arts competitions. And also my coaches, were giving me positive reinforcement. Hey, you're lighter, you're performing better. This is a great thing. Keep it going. And so I kept trying to push harder and harder. And I think that's something that even those that are non-athletes, but they've gotten into this fixation or this cycle where they constantly want to be lighter, or they're constantly checking their scale weight, they can really relate to. And so unfortunately, I eventually got to the point where I was constantly developing injuries. I had major GI issues. I was constantly feeling fatigued. I had no energy at all.
Hmm.
And due to, I had multiple nutrient deficiencies and had, so once I got checked out, like it was shown that I had nutrient deficiencies. I had downregulated hormone production for someone my age. Like when they were looking at me, I kind of looked like an elderly old man. I was 14, but like I had the hormone profiles of like
Yeah.
an elderly person. And it was due to being in a state of low energy availability for so long. And like I mentioned, like unfortunately, when all this occurred, it was the early 2000s. So the concept of relative energy deficiency wasn't even a thing. And luckily for my sake, I had so many injuries that it required me to go to physical therapy for like a full year of time. And so I went to a clinic multiple times a week, and it was actually run by a two doctors, two physical therapists, one of which was a power lifter and one was a bodybuilder. So they not only got me into resistance training to help rehabilitate my body, but they also taught me about the importance of nutrition and how beneficial fueling myself for training was,
Got
which has stuck
lucky.
with me. Yeah, no, 100. No, I always say that I was so blessed in terms of who I was able to surround myself with, because they not only got me to at an early age to really appreciate and fall in love with training, but they also, were able to get me to really realize and switch my mindset and really switch my perspective on nutrition. And they, this is one of the experiences, or that was one of the experiences that anchors my desire to teach others about how to properly fuel themselves and train in an evidence-based manner, so they don't go through the painful and frustrating experiences that I went through early on when quality information wasn't as accessible as it is today. So my goal with this episode is to educate our audience on the topic of relative energy deficiency and low energy availability in order to help anyone out there who is stuck in this mindset where they feel like their only option is to eat less and exercise more, and they're feeling the side effects of underfueling themselves, but they're trying to like bury their heads in the sand and ignore the warning signs their body is giving them because they fear pulling back to resolve their issues, and they just keep digging themselves into a deeper and deeper hole.
Uh, you know, we often hear about women starting a diet at a young age. And I was probably 16 when I went through my first hard cut to try to get Sean Phillip abs. And I think boys, especially because if you're in sports, we just get taught differently to eat. Like, and you'll see that come up with a lot of guys who play football. They'll drop 3 pounds, they'll go smash McDonald's thinking they lost 3 pounds of muscle. And like it teaches different disordered
Absolutely.
eating. But you and I kind of like, I didn't get as bad as you have, but I kind of, where I've been in bodybuilding for 27 years, I definitely wasn't good at my body back in the early part because we just didn't know any better. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. There wasn't the education about this. And this is
Yeah.
why this is so important to dive into, because it doesn't matter if you're 16 or 11 like I was, or you're 25 or you're 45. If you're continuing to do these things and you're not aware of the negative effects, the differences, or the side effects, the consequences of doing this, you're never going to really be able to switch your mindset out of this. And we both went through these experiences where we were educated. So I was, like I always say, like I went through a lot of hardships in those 3 years that I was in the state, but I also learned a lot very early on, and it made me interested and also has allowed me to help so many other people in a similar situation. However, there are a lot of people that they just don't have access to this education, or they aren't coming across the right coaches or influencers or educators
Yeah.
to get this information. So they kind of think like, hey, this is normal. It's normal that I constantly feel fatigued. fatigue. It's normal that, I'm feeling all these physiological side effects and I feel like I'm on low battery mode all the time. And it's not.
Well, I also think you have a lot of people who try to like cheat the system. You know what I mean? Like, and try to either outwork it somehow, some way, or try to figure out how they can have the life they want and defy what the human body can actually do. So,
Absolutely.
what is the difference then between energy balance and energy availability? Can you kind of tease that out a little bit? Because
Absolutely.
there is a difference in it, and people often get that confused when you see like posting on social media or hear different content. I'm like, oh, they're different. So can you elaborate that?
100%. So most are familiar with the concept of energy balance, and they often confuse energy availability
Okay.
to mean the same thing as energy balance. But these are two separate concepts and are calculated differently, although they are commonly like used in the same, people use them in the same sentence or they'll use them interchangeably, and they're not. So we're going to differentiate between the two. But energy balance refers to the relationship between the amount of energy we consume on a daily basis and the total amount of energy we extend on a daily basis. So if we're in a state of neutral energy balance, where we're maintaining our body weight and our body composition, our calories out and our calories in and our calories out would match one another. And the largest difference with
Mhm.
energy balance is energy balance equation looks at the total energy intake and our total daily energy expenditure, which includes our BMR, our thermic effective feeding, our NEAT, and our EAT. So our non-activity or non-exercise activity thermogenesis and our exercise activity thermogenesis. Whereas energy availability looks at our total energy intake minus our energy expenditure specifically from exercise by itself in relation to our level of fat-free mass or lean body mass. So with energy availability, what we're looking at is whatever energy is left over from exercise is what the body has available and can use for physiological function, for growth, for repair, reproduction, recovery, and various other physiological processes. So this equation is unlike energy balance in that it doesn't consider our basal metabolic rate, our thermic effective feeding, and NEAT levels. And when our energy availability drops below a threshold, which will range between people and between sexes, the body will respond by shutting down certain non-essential processes. And in this situation of low energy availability, the body is kind of similar to like a smartphone, which has lost much of its battery and it goes on low battery mode. So
That's a
it's
good
trying to
analogy.
conserve. No, it's a great analogy because really what the body's trying to do, and this is what people don't realize, our body is set up for survival. So when we're on low battery, we have low energy in the system. What it ends up doing is it goes on low battery mode to try to conserve the little energy it has left. And although there is an equation that underlies energy availability, it's extremely difficult to accurately measure as someone's energy intake, their energy expenditure specifically through exercise, and someone's level of fat-free mass are three areas which are confounded by multiple levels of error. So it would need to be done in like a lab setting, which is not how any of us go through our daily lives. So in order to see if we're suffering from this, we really need to look at the symptoms of REDS and the systems it affects, and also look at lab work, which is a much more accurate way to assess someone's hormone production and if they're in a state of relative energy deficiency. So this is where we would be pulling labs like our testosterone or estrogen or progesterone. We look at a full thyroid panel. So we're talking about everything from T4, free T4, T3, free T3, and even reverse T3 and TSH is a good way to go about it. But we'll cover that in more detail later. However, first we need to look at the underlying causes of REDS, because this is really what causes this issue and all the downstream cascading effects that it has. And this is where a lot of people are unaware of the difference between like energy balance and creating an energy deficit and energy availability and being in a chronic state of low energy availability that leads to a state of relative energy deficiency.
So then what are the causes and contributions then? I guess we should probably discuss because you're heavily alluding to it. So let's just go ahead and get into it.
So, all right. So there are several causes and contributing factors to REDS, such as a prolonged state of low energy availability, excessive levels of high intensity and high output exercise, things like low leptin levels, low carbohydrate availability, something called within day low energy availability, which is pretty much due to a lack of proper meal timing and not fueling throughout the course of the day, especially in relation to our times of training, excessive fasting, and also micronutrient deficiencies. But the main underlying cause is low energy availability, which can take on various forms. And although the main cause of REDS is low energy availability, this is due to a long-term state of low energy availability, as we can actually sustain low energy availability for short periods of time. So an example of that is like when you're in a fat loss phase, you're inducing calorie deficit. So you are technically in a state of low energy availability. However, this is a temporary period, especially if you periodize your nutrition and you're phasic in terms of your approaches. And also if you focus on recovering after it, and if your recovery from the diet is done correctly. And then also, we all actually experience a period of low energy availability every single day. As when we go to sleep, we go into a fasting state for an extended period of time. So we technically wake up in a state of what's called transient, so temporary low energy availability. However, REDS develops as a result of chronic and long-term severe low energy availability that causes issues at many different systems in the body. So REDS comes from the accumulation of long bouts of low energy availability, and the effects we see from REDS can take a long time to manifest, especially when it comes to side effects like a loss in bone mineral density. But the issue is many individuals in our society, and especially within our industry or like fitness-minded individuals, today have a history of chronic dieting and underfueling themselves. So they've been in a state of low energy availability for extended periods of time across the course of their life, which increases the risk of developing REDS. And when we look at like low energy availability, we see that females are much more sensitive and susceptible to low energy availability and to suffering more, I guess, drastic consequences of low energy availability than men. But we do see both sexes impacted heavily by the situation. Now, when we're in a state of low energy availability, the body looks to conserve energy in any way that it can. And in order to do so, it'll initially decrease the resting metabolic rate and also lower thyroid production. And this is why for some who have been in a prolonged state of low energy availability, they can actually be in energy balance and not losing any weight despite eating a very low calorie intake, which most would, which to most would be looked at as like a deficit, but they're actually not in a deficit because their body has downregulated so many internal physiological processes that now it's just their maintenance. And then also other factors that we can look at is, excessive exercise. So REDS can also be the result of excessive energy expenditure from excessive exercise routines coupled with this insufficient energy intake to cover that energy expenditure from exercise. And this is why we commonly see REDS in athletes that have high training volumes and are constantly training like endurance athletes or multi-sport athletes, which are training multiple hours a day, which was one of my initial issues that caused me to experience this. As at one time, I was averaging 3 to 4 hours a day between running and martial arts when I was growing up, which led me to expending a ton of energy. And then also we have to think about it. It's not just that we're underfueling ourselves, but also if you're training 3 to 4 hours a day, that's limiting the amount of time that you have to consume food. So it's really hard to catch back up. You're pretty much like just chasing your tail and chasing calories, if anything. And so the energy left over from exercise is what's available for our physiological function. And due to the body being a survival organism, it's going to prioritize energy for our brain and organs, not our muscles and our bones. So this is a situation where there isn't enough energy in the system to complete the work that the body needs to go through to do so. So the body decreases physiological functions to conserve energy. And then another reason why REDS is so common in athletes, besides the fact that they're engaging in a ton of training and aiming to better their performance, is because they have the added, pressure of social media and what they believe they should look like to be a representative of their sport. So we see there's so many of these like societal ideals. Like we have to look the part. If you're a cyclist, you have to look like Lance Armstrong. If you're an endurance runner, you have to look like one of these Kenyans. Like there's so many of these societal expectations that are put upon us, especially when we're seeing our favorite athletes that are these freak genetic outliers on social media, and we expect to be able to do what they do and look like them, and that's going to lead us to the results we want, when we don't realize there's so many other factors in that equation that we're not accounting for. Then another contributing factor to REDS is low levels of leptin. So in this state, leptin levels drop down substantially as leptin production is affected heavily by energy availability and specifically carbohydrate availability. So leptin is also closely tied to signaling the hypothalamus that the body has enough energy for physiological processes such as hormone production. So when we see leptin is low, it specifically downregulates what's called LH production, so luteinizing hormone production, which lowers testosterone production in men at the level of the testes, and then also lowers estrogen production in females at the level of the ovaries. Another contributing factor to developing REDS is restricting carbohydrates, which leads to what's called a state of low carbohydrate availability. And carbohydrate availability is tied to leptin production, it's tied to luteinizing hormone production and thyroid production, and it's also needed for fueling high intensity exercise, and is also the preferred fuel source for the brain and central nervous system. And some other factors that contribute to the development of REDS is within day energy availability and fasting. So if you're someone who is highly active, it's not just enough to focus on your total calorie intake, especially if the timing of that calorie intake is far away from training. So for a great example of this, and this is something we kind of covered in our nutrient timing series where we went over pre-workout and fasted training. If you're someone that you've done a ton of training in the morning without eating, so you're in a fasted state and you don't eat until after, or you don't eat, a post-workout meal until later in the day, even if you eat at maintenance calories, you've been in a state of low energy availability for the majority of the day, and this will increase the likelihood of experiencing RED symptoms. So this is where nutritional periodization and nutrient timing comes into play, as we want to make sure that we periodize our approach to nutrition where we aren't constantly dieting and in a deficit. And we also want to make sure that we're going into high intensity training sessions well fueled and replenishing our energy reserves after. So if you guys have any more interest on that topic, specifically about fueling yourself properly before, during, and after training, I encourage you to go back. We actually just did a series of 3 podcasts where we cover nutrient timing and peri-workout nutrition in great detail. So that will really, tie it up for you. But the last, area that we see that contributes to a state of relative energy deficiency is certain micronutrient deficiencies that are common in REDs. And these most notably are a deficiency in vitamin D, which is important for calcium reabsorption and bone health.
And now you're recommending when people do D3, you also recommend like a K2 in there too, because it just makes sense.
But I'm talking about the actual nutrient deficiency.
Yeah.
With REDs. No,
I always tell people, I'm like, look, you're going to do D3 on anything that's recommended. Just get the K2. It's a good addition.
Absolutely. No. It is a very synergistic combination, to say the least. But really, while we're looking at vitamin D specifically for low energy availability and relative energy deficiency, is because we see that as common micronutrient deficiencies that exacerbate the symptoms of REDs. And the reason for that is vitamin D is important for calcium reabsorption and bone health. It helps with metabolic function of muscle. It helps with the immune system support. And then also calcium, which is involved in muscular contraction, bone mineral density, and muscle function. And so these are all, contributing factors that essentially cause or they lead to REDS development, and then lead to the downstream cascades and the consequences that we'll discuss further.
When you get with clients, is there any way that you could kind of like, say I was a listener of the show, is there anything that you would say a person could do? Is there like a website, signs, symptoms checklist that they could go to read more about REDs so they could kind of understand about this about themselves?
So it's called REDS Hat. It's a diagnostic tool that is used by medical practitioners as well as sports scientists. It was developed, I believe, by the International Olympic Committee to really be able to parse out the development or the prevalence of REDs within elite athletes. And they pretty much do it by I believe it's yellow, amber, and red. And so really what they're doing, it's a color-coded system, which kind of puts athletes in a category based on the prevalence or their susceptibility to REDs or their current state of low energy availability. So red, it makes sense, but red is like a severe state. So they're in low energy availability and they're suffering from relative energy deficiency. And that's really where you could look at the signs, symptoms, and consequences of REDs and see if what you're experiencing relates to what is on that categorization. But it is kind of complicated because it is used generally by medical practitioners.
What are the consequences of REDs? And I know we had talked about a little bit about signs and symptoms, but let's go into like a deeper dive on that, and we can start nuancing them apart if we want to.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, before we get into the consequences, I think it's important to cover the fact that there's actually 2 forms of REDs, but they present with very similar signs, symptoms, and consequences. So we have what's called involuntary and voluntary REDs. So involuntary REDs is a form of REDs that happens unintentionally just due to either a lack of nutritional literacy or lack of awareness around how much energy an athlete needs. So they end up unintentionally underfueling themselves. So this is the common athlete that they're so busy. They have such high training loads. They're just not, conscious. They don't track their food. So they don't realize how much they're expending, and they're so active, and maybe they've downregulated like their hunger signaling and things of that sort. And so they're underfueling unintentionally. But then what we have, which is a little bit more common and prevalent in, especially, in the people that I see or the athletes that I have come to me or the clients that I have come to me, is what's called voluntary REDs. And this has more of a psychological element to it, where an athlete is specifically and intentionally restricting their energy intake or they're purposely trying to keep their body weight and their body fat lower than they can do in a healthy manner. So they're purposely over restricting themselves. They're underfueling. You're doing excessive exercise and realizing that they're feeling these signs, symptoms, and warning signals, but they're ignoring them. So there's signs going off. There's red flags within in the system, and they're getting negative biofeedback. However, a lot of times they're burying their head in the sand. And with the condition of REDS, there are two what they call spoken wheels that outline the signs, symptoms, and health consequences that stem from being in a state of energy deficiency. And so within the health consequences someone with REDS can experience, we see impairments in their metabolic function, their growth and development, their endocrine function, the function of their immune system, their gastrointestinal system, menstrual cycle function, bone health and bone mineral density, their psychology, and then hematological function and cardiovascular system. And then there's also, so that's the first spoken wheel. The other spoken wheel that they look at in the literature and they see the effects of is a list of potential performance effects that someone with REDS can experience, which includes decreases in training response and muscle strength and endurance performance, increased injury risk, decreases in glycogen stores, decreases in coordination, concentration, and cognition, and impairments in judgment. And then they also have a potential for irritability and depression. And within these categories, there are some specific symptoms and consequences that someone with REDS may exhibit that are tied into a lot of these systems, such as a decrease in metabolic function. So what we see in those with REDS, and something that's extremely common and prevalent, is that they'll often experience downregulations in thyroid production, and we'll actually see this in low T3 and T4 on blood work. And so there's cross-sectional research looking at females with amenorrhea as compared to both regularly menstruating females and healthy controls, which has found lower T4 and T3 levels in those with an amenorrhea. There's also research mostly conducted by this researcher who's like really prominent in this field from the early 90s, named Ann Laux, which has experimentally, what she did was she pretty much experimentally induced a state of low energy availability in females because she really wanted to see the physiological effects in a laboratory controlled setting. And what she did was she induced a state of low energy availability in some females, and then also compared them to females that were in the same lab settings doing the same amount of exercise, and they were at normal energy availability. And she found that the ones with low energy availability led to a decrease in T3 and free T3 and an increase in reverse T3 as compared to being in a normal state of energy availability. And she also did some work where she looked at females with amenorrhea in comparison to healthy controls and found that those with amenorrhea, I hate that word now, I tell you. it always trips me up. I always think about it in my head. I'm spelling it out in my head, but it's amenorrhea. Anyway. She found, let me go back to it. She found that those with amenorrhea had lower T4, free T4, T3, and I believe lower free T3 levels than the healthy control group. And along with these effects we see on thyroid production in those with low energy availability and REDS, other aspects of their endocrine function can be impaired, which is especially impactful on their sex hormone production and can result in decreases in testosterone, estradiol, and progesterone. Now, another category. So we have these 10 different systems that REDS impacts, and we won't go through them all, but there are some ones that are going to be more applicable to our audience or more in terms of like people that are interested in body composition. These are going to be more important. So the next one is we actually see from REDS a blunting in growth and development. So most with REDS will eventually get to a point where they're unable to adapt to their training and can't recover from their training, which can result in a plateau in muscle growth, and in many cases, a loss of muscle, which will only further, it only further lowers their metabolic rate, which is already suppressed, as muscle is a metabolic expensive tissue to gain and maintain. So when we lose muscle, our resting metabolic rate drops as a result. And this is something that we've went through many times in the podcast. We've looked at the literature on this, but this is something we see very common in those with REDS. So those with REDS will often also notice that they're putting in a ton of effort with their training, but not getting the same results and outcomes they used to, which is a sign of not being able to actually adapt to their training loads. Yeah. And within that, we can also notice an inability to recover from training, a substantial drop off in training performance, and feeling fatigued all the time. And then research, which has specifically looked at the physiological effects of REDS on female athletes has found that females with energy deficiency see decreases in lean body mass. They see reductions in FSH and LH. They see suppression in estradiol and testosterone levels. They see decreases in leptin, IGF-1 and T3 levels, and they see increases in fasting PYY and ghrelin. So we're seeing like a skewing of all these anabolic hormones are going down. They're having hunger hormones go up, and then they also see increases in cortisol levels, so a stress hormone, and then also GH resistance. And this research also alluded to the notion that all of these changes seen in these females impair their bone health, which is why we see decreases in bone mineral density to be so common in those with RED-S, especially females. And this is one of the biggest effects that we have to think long-term, because we lay down bone mineral density early on in life, and women are already more susceptible to osteoporosis and low bone mineral density. So if you're someone, you're going to, many women are going to experience that when they get into the menopause transition due to the suppression and the lowering and pretty much the tanking of their estradiol levels. However, if you've already put yourself into a state where you have low bone mineral density, it's only going to get compounded even more and leave you more susceptible to osteoporosis later in life. Now, another thing where we look at muscle function and growth and adaptation, in one 2018 study, researchers assessed neuromuscular strength in elite athletes who were either experiencing amenorrhea or cycling regularly, and found that those with amenorrhea had lower knee muscular strength and endurance than those with a normal menstrual cycle. And they also found lower leg fat-free mass, estrogen, and T3 levels in those females without a normal cycle, yet those same females had increased cortisol levels. So they had all the things that were good, they were in a negative aspect, but then they had high cortisol levels. So nothing was looking good just due to the fact that they weren't normally menstruating. And so other research in the area of growth and development has shown that, or has found that, there's a longer time course recovery or recovery time course in those with low energy availability. Now, when it comes to the GI system, those dealing with low energy availability can often experience GI issues such as delayed gastric emptying, increased intestinal transit time, constipation, and this is due to the fact that they're not taking in enough energy to run this physiological process, as proper digestion is a process which requires energy to digest, assimilate, and absorb the nutrients we take in. So a lot of times, like, people don't understand we need energy for all functions in life, and they think that if we have less nutrients to take in, our digestive system is just going to upregulate and it'll be fine. But really, when it comes down to it, you'll see this, especially with women with amenorrhea. They often complain about constipation. They can't go to that. It's a huge issue within our industry. We see this in physique competitors where they can't go to the bathroom for days at a time, and that's a huge issue, especially from a detoxification aspect. And so when we go back to like the GI issues, in a 2018 study done on 1,000 female athletes, they found that 47.3% of the females were in a state of low energy availability. So almost half of those females looked at. And then there was also a 1.5 greater likelihood of GI complaints in those with low energy availability as compared to those with adequate energy availability. Now, when it comes to hematological issues, we see that many of those who suffer with RED-S are deficient in iron, and iron deficiency can worsen the already suppressed metabolic function that comes from low energy availability. And this is due to the fact that both T4 production and the T4 to T3 conversion requires adequate iron levels. So when you're deficient in iron, and this is something we see even in menstruating females because of the loss of iron within the menstrual cycle and from bleeding, but this is something that causes a lot of symptoms of fatigue, low metabolic rate, and all these other downstream cascades. So these are a lot of signs, symptoms, and issues and consequences that come along with being in a state of relative energy deficiency that we really need to look at, we need to be aware of, and then we also need to dive deeper in. And so in today's podcast, we covered the first component of this. Next week, we're going to go into a much more in-depth dive. The last topic I was going to cover today, but we're not going to have the time for it. Jeff has a very short cutoff, and we have a couple minutes for this, but it would be another huge sign and symptom of relative energy deficiency. And it's something that it takes a lot of, detail to go into to really explain the link between low energy availability, relative energy deficiency, and this side effect is the loss of menstrual cycle. So we see menstrual cycle dysfunction as one of the key indicators of females that are in a state of relative energy deficiency. So next week's podcast, we'll go through that, and then we'll also go through some ways to mitigate RED-S, some of the things that I've seen in my own experience working with clients, getting them out of the state of relative energy deficiency, and then also what the literature leads to or what it indicates, because this is still a fledgling field. So when I tell you, they just coined this term in 2014. That's literally when it came out. However, we have literature going back to the mid 80s and the early 90s on the female athlete triad. So we're going to pull from some of that, but then we're also going to go into the latest literature on the specific concept of relative energy deficiency and how to mitigate some of these side effects, and also some of the advice, some of the nuanced aspects in which we can provide some contextual information where you guys can take this and try to apply it to yourself. Because a lot of people, they don't have the information, they don't provide it. And this is also a topic that affects a lot of people, especially within the bodybuilding industry, but they are unaware that it even exists. And so when you're unaware of something, you have no ability to treat it. You have no ability to approach it, because when you don't have the information, it's almost like being blind. So if you're unaware that this is a condition and there's also ways to alleviate it, to improve upon it, you're just going to keep going through your daily life as it is. Maybe blaming other symptoms and side effects and things of that sort, or looking and utilizing different strategies. So we're going to provide some principles that hopefully can help those out there to be able to experience a better quality of life, better physiological function, better, menstrual cycle function, and also just, be able to perform better, be able to respond to their training again, and really get back to being able to live a better life in the gym as well as out of the gym.
It's interesting, and you know how I read all like the weird shit books and all that stuff, but they talk about a lot when people who are micronutrient deficient, which is at the core of reds and things like that, like, you see a theme. But what they talk about a lot, and I think you're going to see this in the future, and I guarantee even you would probably agree with me on this. Well, maybe I hope so. But mitochondria is going to be like the hot word in the next few years. But they show that people who kind of do what you're talking about with res and have micronutrient deficiencies usually have a mitochondria impairment of some kind. Therefore, their body isn't like utilizing energy at a proper rate and so forth. So it's just interesting stuff out there. So that was a very cool episode, man. You're right. No one else in the space has really covered it. I've read about it and things like that. And from a coaching perspective, I never have conversations like that on the nuances, because it's usually like, hey, you just don't eat enough. Like, we just need to get you to eat more and eat nourished, because food's nourishment. Like I tell everybody, when you look at dieting, it should be what nutritional therapeutic approach, because food is very healing.
Food is medicine, man. And that's why, I think a lot of times as coaches, and I think you could relate to this, a lot of times what we put out or who we work with, or really our intentions and our purpose with coaching, is to fix things we've either experienced, mistakes we've made, or we get really into topics that we've experienced ourselves. And so this is stuff that I've dove into because I suffered with it myself. Same thing with metabolic adaptation and all these nuanced conversations that I've brought to podcasts and working with hundreds, or even in the thousands at this point of clients. And so I've tried to bridge the gap between the research as well as the application, and being able to really bridge that gap, because there is a large disconnection right now in what's shown in literature as well as what coaches are doing in practice. Because, a lot of times they don't talk first and foremost. And then also a lot of people, the reason why this isn't covered, prominently in our industry is because a lot of people aren't aware of it. And so they, not having an understanding leads them to not having all the tools in their toolbox necessary to help those people in that position. And like I always say, I don't have a niche clientele. So I work with people, everyone from Lifestyle Lisa and Gen Pop Gym to your IFBB pros, but everyone in between includes that. And so I've worked with endurance athletes. I've worked with triathletes. I've worked with all these, high volume athletes that are suffering from this, former CrossFit competitors that are training 3 times a day. These are very common things within, these different sports, that oftentimes when we only narrow our scope to just bodybuilding or just fitness or just general population, we kind of miss the forest for the trees, because there's other things going on in the background that just educating ourselves about will be able to help us, even if it's not with the exact client, clients that we're working with in our roster today. These are skills and these are tools that we can eventually take out of the toolbox and utilize later when we have, tough client cases come our way.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%, man. Where can everybody find you at and so forth?
All right, guys, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at @BetaCruz, @BetaCruz_ or Brandon DeCruz _. I'm messing up my email and my, it's been a long podcast to say the least, and my IG. And then my email is betacruzfitness@gmail.com. And as always, guys, feel free to subscribe to us, share, follow, all that kind of stuff. We always appreciate that.
I can be found on Chef Unbreakable Black on Instagram. I seem to be appearing more. Brandon still can't tag me and shit. But and the other part is I am on YouTube as well with Relentless Forever. I'm really digging that, having a good time.
All right, my guys.
With that being said, guys, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for sharing. Be sure to share, comment, like, get us out there if y'all love this stuff. Peace.